We're continuing to talk about tools for building high tunnels. In this toolbox we got a lot of random stuff, but a lot of good tools in here. One of the things that we use a lot of is these ratcheting wrenches, these box-ended wrenches that ratchet. I like having a set of these in my tool bag or my tool belt in case there's a situation where I don't want to go back and grab an impact or a new tool to use something like that. So I like to keep a 7/16 for 1/4 inch bolts, a 1/2 inch for 5/16 bolts, and a 9/16 for 3/8 bolts. So we have a whole set in here. We also use some 3/8 and some other odd sizes that we have in here. Another tool that works really well is a spring punch. This is a tool to start a divot when you're drilling a self-tapping screw that won't bite to begin with, or when you're drilling a hole. You just push it against the steel, and it just makes a little divot. It springs and makes a little punch, but it's spring-loaded. Another tool that I always try to make sure that I have is a set of Allen wrenches, or Allen keys, and these are really helpful. We use these a lot for linear actuators, for some of our automated ventilation systems, but it's always nice to have a set of these. Another tool that I really like a lot and don't want to build movable tunnels without is a pair of wire cutters. This is a tool that's specifically designed for cutting cable. So when you have some of that steel cable that you're going to be using for some of your different things, if you cut it with some random tools, a lot of times it'll fray at the end. Excuse me. And if you use these wire cutters, you can just go ahead. It takes a little bit of force, but then you cut it and you end up with a really, really nice end with no frayed tip. So I really like these tools. They're a little expensive, but they're a great tool for cutting wire, especially if you're doing anchoring kits for movable buildings. Another tool that's really, really helpful for that same project is to use a ratcheting screwdriver with a deep 5/16 inch socket on it. I have an adapter in here to go down a 1/4 inch to take a deep 5/16 socket. It's a great tool for twisting down your wire clamps or when you're building your wire assembly. So I really like that a lot. We have various screwdrivers in here. Another thing that's really important is a file, especially when you're trying to put your roof hoops on top of your sidewall hoops. If you're building a fixed tunnel and use a ground stake driver and you banged your posts in, sometimes it can bend out that swage a little bit. So before we ever put any of our hoop tops up, I like to take a file, go to the top edges, and file it with it. The wooden handle pushes onto the bottom and is intended to be coming off. You never want to run a file in both directions. Files are intended to only be pushing the blade into the handle. If you go the opposite direction, it'll actually dull the file. So I've had this one for a long time. If you use it properly, they last a really, really long time. Moving on to some of the actual cordless tools that we use. Use a lot of impacts. I don't recommend building a high tunnel without impact drivers. You can use a cordless drill, but these don't have nearly as much torque. So when you use a cordless drill, it can it'll snug the nuts, but it won't really tighten them. So when you use an impact, this is one of the tools that goes rat-tat-tat-tat-tat and really tightens the bolts down because it impacts it as it rotates. I really recommend it. Here's two different types from DeWalt. This one happens to have a light built into it. They're basically the same thing. Another thing we use a lot of is these tool lassos. It's a product from Warner, the ladder company, and this is a clip. You put it into your belt clip, and then you have a little ball that you put on top of your drill. You clip it in there, and it's a really nice way just to hold your tools onto your tool belt. If you have Warner ladders, the same exact ball will go into the top little recess inside of the new Warner ladders, and it's a great mechanism for holding your tools. There's other little hooks available. Here's another hook that you can put on your belt, and then you can just hang your tools from. But that's really, really helpful, especially if you're up on ladders. You want to be careful with stuff like this. If you get it knocked out, it can drop. You don't want anyone to be below you. We always bring a cordless circular saw. I really like this tool for cutting polycarbonate. It's an incredible tool when you need to just cut down some polycarbonate and cut it to size. This cordless circular saw works out really, really well. It's probably not enough of a tool to do like a full wooden end wall, but for simple work, this works really, really well, especially for cutting polycarbonate. A couple different tools here for cutting metal. The best tool is that we use is a variable speed portable bandsaw. After I got one of these tools, I can't imagine building tunnels without them. There's a certain number of cuts that you're going to need to make when you're building your tunnels, like to cut your purlins to fit, or when you're building metal end walls. Again, it's probably a $300 or $400 tool, but a really great investment if you're going to be doing a lot of work with metal. If you don't have the luxury of a bandsaw, you can always use a reciprocating saw. This is a cordless version, but a lot of times we'll also use a corded version as well. I definitely like the ones that have a little lever for quick release for the blades. And it's always good to have a lot of sharp reciprocating saw blades around. You definitely want ones for metal. And there's no embarrassment in using just a hand saw to cut metal. There isn't enough metal cutting in one of these projects that you have to have some more powered equipment, so this is something that's really nice and quick too. When you're doing a lot of metal work, especially metal end walls, I really like to have an angle grinder. Sometimes it's just really helpful just to grind down a weld, or if you have some burrs that you want to get at, this is a very, very fast tool for doing that. You can also get cutting blades on these. Again, a lot of these tools, you really want to make sure that you're following the instructions with them properly, wearing safety equipment, and only using tools if you know what you're doing. You can definitely get hurt, and you got to be careful, and this is one of the tools I would definitely be careful with. We use bolt cutters. One of the primary purposes of the bolt cutters is not for cutting the cable, but we use the bolt cutters a lot to cut our plastic attachment wire. So if you're putting in a plastic attachment wire, you're getting to the end, what you want to do is use the bolt cutters, and you want to cut in the flat part of the wire, not the angled part. And bolt cutters are really the best tool to do that with. When we get over here, we'll see a whole array of some of the different sockets we use, but primarily we use 3 different sizes of sockets. Almost all the sockets we use these little adapters in for 3/8, and almost all the sockets we use are 3/8 sockets. So this adapter goes into your impact and allows you to quickly change between your bits. The sockets, again, 7/16, half, 9/16. There are other sizes that are helpful, but those are 3 primary socket sizes that we're going to use. Most of the other things, if you really need something, you could just use an adjustable wrench. There's also a lot of the different bits that we use. So these are for our self-tapping screws. They have the same attachment point into the impact. This is 5/16 for our number 12 screws, and then we also have different sizes for some of the other size stuff that we're doing. A lot of these over here are 5/16, but we also use a 3/8 drill bit, 3/8 magnetic bit when we're using number 14 self-tapping screws. We also always make sure to have a pair of actual wrenches for our sockets. I like this one in particular. It's nice because it has 2 different types of rotation. You can use it like a regular wrench, or you can twist the handle, so if you're in tight spots, you can still ratchet down with it. This set right here is coming really, really useful. This is a set of pass-through sockets. So these are sockets that you put onto the wrench, and what it allows you to do is if you're tightening really long bolts, it's a pass-through socket. Instead of being a deep socket, you can go down threaded rods, and this pass-through socket is another really, really great tool. And one kit will basically give you everything that you need. Moving down here, we use a lot of permanent markers, different colors of permanent markers. Sometimes we want to mark certain different types of things. I definitely recommend, if you can, get the ones that will write even if something's wet, because outside a lot of different things can happen. Having pens and pieces of paper to write down notes is also really helpful. We use a lot of duct tape when we're trying to cover any sharp edges before we skin our buildings with plastic. Electrical tape for any of the electrical stuff that you're doing, and also Teflon tape if you're doing any sort of any threaded components with anything associated with irrigation. Always have a whole bunch of reciprocating saw blades, a whole bunch of jigsaw blades. We do use a jigsaw when we're trimming the top edge of our polycarbonate for when we have polycarbonate on our end walls. Here's another bit extender. Sometimes these little bits aren't long enough. For example, if you're doing sidewall doors, you need to get through into a deep cavity. This has got some threads in it, but you push this in and it will extend your magnetic bits to allow you to get further into places that the regular bits won't reach into. Then we have a bunch of drill bits. We spend the money and get more expensive drill bits. We get them with the split tip bits to them. These things run between $12 to $20 a piece. We do a lot of metal work, so investing in the money for a lot of nice drill bits really makes a difference. A tool that we use a lot is a drill doctor. It's a drill bit sharpening tool. We go through drill bits so fast, it's really nice to be able to sharpen our own drill bits, so we don't always have to keep buying new drill bits over and over and over again. You're also going to need scissors. These are great for cutting greenhouse plastic, or trimming it on the end, or cutting your rolls so you can cut your greenhouse plastic to fit. Another cutting tool that I really like is this. It's a Craftsman Professional cutting blade, and it's called like an AccuCut, I believe. And what I really like about this is that you can pull the jaw back, use it as a utility knife, or you can use it. And I like this a lot for cutting like irrigation lines and things like that. It's just a great multi-purpose cutting tool. We also, usually in our pockets, we're always carrying, Sharpies or utility blades for opening bags to anything else that we might need. Some of the larger equipment that is really helpful to have, definitely shovels, hand tamper, things like that. Anytime that you're putting in any of your rebar tees for V-track, a sledgehammer is really a great tool for that. You definitely want to use safety glasses whenever you're using a sledgehammer or anything else. When you're putting in T-posts, we always like to use a T-post pounder, and then when you're pulling out T-posts, we use this T-post puller. This is an economical version that's pretty affordable. We actually sell a nicer version. It's a little heavier duty that also has a chain hook on it for pulling T-posts. With movable buildings, we use a lot of T-posts because there are commercially available pounding and pulling equipment to get that T-post out of the ground. Another thing that we always have with us is our tool belts. I personally like the tool belts that have the shoulder straps just because these things can get pretty heavy, especially if you're doing a lot of work on ladders. I really like the tool belts too that have a handle on them, so you can carry it and use it more like a tool bag when you aren't actually wearing it. A lot of different types of gloves. There's a lot of sharp edges on these buildings, so I definitely recommend using gloves. I actually like the fingerless gloves because even when it's cold outside, you want to be able to still be able to thread on the nuts onto some of the different types of things. So these are some of the tools of the trade, and definitely as a company called Four Season Tools, we like using the tools, but having the right tool will definitely make the job a lot easier. Other bigger tools that you're going to need that aren't in here is definitely step ladders. You don't want to be building high tunnels with extension ladders, especially because you're building the frame as you go. So definitely tall step ladders. It'd be really great to have maybe a couple 6 or 8 foot step ladders, and then maybe a couple 10s or 12s. If you've got ridge vents, I definitely recommend a pair of 12-foot step ladders because you need to be able to get really high up there. We have built high tunnels with scaffolding in the earlier days, and it just didn't really seem to be worth all the effort to move it around and take it down. So we've really settled that step ladders are a great tool for doing that. There's a lot of powered equipment that really helps, obviously using tractors to move dirt around, using an auger on the back of a tractor to dig holes. In site preparation, you'll see the use of a powered tamper for packing down some of the V-track pads. So there's tools that wouldn't necessarily fit on a bench that are also really helpful when building your high tunnels. But look at your installation manual. In Chapter 1, it talks about the tools that you need to build your high tunnel, and hopefully this video helped you understand some of the things that you're going to need.